welcome to A Film Darkly. I'm your host, Anthony Paceno, and in today's episode, I'm going to be discussing the movie Prometheus. With Alien Covenant having just come out, I figured it'd be a good time to talk about this film. This is probably the first movie I'm going to be doing where I literally am not a fan of the film. And you'll kind of see why as I break this movie down and I talk about the philosophical concepts within it. And if you've seen Alien Covenant, you'll understand some of the connections that happen in that film. And I'll probably go over a quick little review of that film without spoilers, stating exactly why I don't like that film either. It's not necessarily because it doesn't have aliens or something, but it's just, that's the big issue with Prometheus. Prometheus was sold as a prequel to the Alien franchise and ended up just giving these engineers. And the engineers, I think, are an interesting concept. Just don't try and sell me that it's an alien film when it's not. But anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get into Prometheus, because I was going to finish a thought there with Alien Covenant, but I think I should just cut it off and go straight into this. So Prometheus is really, really interesting in how it begins. It begins with this this huge investor and wealthy man by the name of Wayland, and he owns Wayland Enterprises, and he recruits Elizabeth Shaw and Charlie Holloway to lead this mission to a planet. And the reason they're going to this planet is because written in all these ancient cave drawings and stuff like that are these designs of these giant people pointing to the stars, and you see the exact same symbolism all over the world, and they believe that it's a link in some way to their creator, to their maker, so to speak. And so the idea is we have the technology, we have the means, and we got this super rich guy that's just funding it all, and he's going to send us out there. Now, the reason Wayland is so curious is Wayland is afraid of death. He's basically extremely afraid of dying, and he wants to answer the greatest question of all, which is, where do I come from? Why do I exist? It's the big question that, when I tell people, hey, I'm working toward my degree in philosophy, it's the first question people ask me. What's the meaning of life? That's what everyone always asks me. And I'm like, the point of philosophy is to try and understand that. But, as any philosopher knows, there's 100,000 problems that come before you can even begin to try and answer that question. Just because it depends on how you think, what you think, and what your ontology is, and what sort of, if you're an epistemologist, if you think about epistemology, you're going to be like, well, what are you? Are you an empiricist, or are you a rationalist? Because that's going to, right there alone, is going to change the way you think. So you have to be really, really concerned with all these variables before you can even begin to think about the meaning of life. The meaning of life is just it's a huge, huge question that requires many variables to be answered before you even get there. But the quick route, the fast way of answering this question is to know more about your maker. Well, who created you? A lot of people feel God created them. Other people believe it's natural circumstance. And in this film, we have these scientists that are suggesting otherwise. And the reason they're suggesting otherwise, which are not suggesting a God necessarily, although Elizabeth Shaw clearly is a woman of faith and does believe in God in some respects. There is a scene there's a small part in the movie where somebody actually says, you're willing to just throw away, decades of research or actually he might say a bigger number than that. I don't think I have the actual quote though, because it wasn't an important quote. But he says, he's like, you're willing to throw away all this research we have on evolution to essentially tell people, oh, you actually came from these other beings? He's like, it's basically garbage in his opinion. But it's not, because at the beginning of the film, at least within this world, because at the beginning of the film we see that there's an engineer and he drinks this stuff and it disintegrates his body. He falls over and he breaks apart and landing into a river. And what's the DNA that's within the water begins to start to formulate, and what that's doing is creating life. So human beings actually do derive from these engineers, at least that's what we're shown. And now these people are following the clues to find out where these quote-unquote engineers live, so they can ask them, well, why do we exist? And the guy we're supposed to be paying the most attention to, the person we need to focus on, Wayland is the example of the human race trying their hardest to strive to survive, to live forever. And so what Wayland is constantly doing is he's this human being who's representing the human rat race as a whole. Our whole idea of let's cure all diseases, let's do this, let's end world hunger, let's end this and end that, so we can end suffering and not die. It's one of the major complaints about God. If God exists, why is there suffering in the world? In other words, why do you die? That's what you're asking. Why do I die, and why can I die in the most horrible way possible? Why are there people dying in the most horrible way possible? Why isn't heaven existing on earth? That's what you're asking. If you're one of those people, one of those critics, and you're just sitting there, God's so mean because there's evil in the world. Well, all you're doing is arguing from your perspective and saying there cannot be a creator, because if there is, heaven would be on earth. You basically are given somebody to be pissed off about. So it's kind of like, I can't be mad if I trip on the sidewalk, on a bump in the sidewalk, and bang my nose against the ground, but I can be mad if a guy sticks his foot out and trips me, because now I have someone to blame. But if I have no one to blame, then I can't really complain about what's wrong with the world. I just have to do my best within my power to try and make things different. But if I do have someone to blame, i.e. God, then I get to point at God, my crooked finger, and say, God, your fault. You're evil. And then from there I get to conclude, you know what? Since God's allowing all this, I guess God doesn't exist, and it must be all about me, and I'm the one who can now play God and do what I need to do to try to survive. So people don't like the idea of authority not being in their hands, and thus they don't like the idea of there being God, because if there's God, then God's allowing too much. More than they would allow. Of course, that's assuming a lot, but that's unfortunately what people do when they think about the concept of God. So, at the very, very beginning of the film, now we're going to finally get into the movie a little more, we're introduced to the character of David. And David is an android that was created by Wayland. And he's incredibly smart. He has the ability to basically learn anything within seconds, and he actually can conduct emotions and feel, and has an amount of free will that is sort of beyond just the aspects of being someone who can be controlled. So he's not just an android who follows your commands. He actually has a little bit of personality and a way of thinking outside of all of that. And David is our window into what a creation should be thinking about their creator in this film. He's kind of our window, and it's really, really interesting. So there's a few different quotes in the movie that David watches these old films. And when he watches these old films, he learns about these he learns these certain quotes, and he loves to like state those quotes. And there's a one scene early on in the film, where David is actually quoting a film. He quotes the movie Lawrence of Arabia. And there's one other quote from David. Oh, okay. There's one quote early on that the movie emphasizes, and I still cannot figure out exactly what it's trying to say. But it's this part where David's actually watching a film, and this guy does a magic trick, and he does this magic trick with fire. And everyone's trying to figure out, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you do it? And at the end, this guy asks him how he did it, and he says, "The trick, William Hunter, is not minding that will hurt." So it's like he's saying the trick to doing my trick is that you can't mind the pain of the fire. And I don't understand what that means, but it means something. And that's the reason I'm bringing it up, because some of you have the ability to think, about this stuff all on your own. In fact, most of you are probably smarter than I am. So hopefully you can come up with how exactly that fits into this film, because I don't understand. But the quote from Lawrence of Arabia is, "There is nothing in the desert, and no man needs nothing." And David says this when they're entering the planet where the engineers are. And it's really fascinating that he says that, because I think that quote is the key to the entire film. There is nothing in the desert, and no man needs nothing. As if to say, when you're entering into this world, when you're trying to find answers, you may be finding yourself entering a desert. And there's nothing there. You don't need nothing. So why are you entering into the desert? Why are you trying to seek out certain answers when the answers may be with you all along? And I think this has to do with the fact that David, being an android, recognizes that because he won't die and he can take on information in a level that no human being can, he's above human beings. And if David's kind, quote unquote, were to suddenly be evacuated to a far off planet and were to start to look for their makers because their makers left signs, what would they find but dust? And if they did find remaining humans, would they be disappointed because they age and they die and they don't know as much? It's like going into the desert. So there's a few interesting conversations, and the two interesting conversations are mostly between Charlie Holloway and David. And Charlie is, as I said earlier, is one of the people. He works with Shaw, and him and Shaw are in a relationship. And the two of them are the ones who are discovering all these symbols, and so they're heading the mission. And Charlie at one point is suiting up, and they're all suiting up because they're going to go outside and they're going to go look within the grounds of this area that the engineers are. And Charlie's suiting up and he says, "David, why are you wearing a suit, man?" And David looks at him and he says, "I beg your pardon?" And Charlie responds, "You don't breathe, remember? So why wear a suit?" And David says, "I was designed like this because you are more comfortable interacting with your own kind. If I didn't wear a suit, it would defeat the purpose." So David's saying, what I am is different from you, but I'm designed to look like you because you're only comfortable with you. That's all you like to see is you. And how true is that? That's not only true for people in terms of race, in terms of the human being. It's true in terms of race. It's true in terms of tribe. Certain races don't like other races because they look different. And that's happened all throughout the world. This is even talking about like the issues we like to look at today, or the small issues here in the United States that we just love to inflate into big giant problems and act like we're the only racists in the world. No, you live in other parts of the country. They don't like each other. They're neighbors and they don't like one another. And the Middle East is a great example of this. To us, they're all the same. And to them, they're so different. You dare say they're the same, and they're wanting to pick a fight with you, if not kill you. Because it's such a blatant ignorance you're displaying. Human beings are no different. This is the reason why we have this big question about whether or not an android can be human. And to most people, it's a definite no. Why? Because they don't have flesh like us. Because they're fake. They're a machine. See? So David to them is not human. But see, Charlie says something right after this. And he says, they're making you guys pretty close, huh? And David says this, not too close, I hope. What did David mean by that? What did David mean by that? It's easy. David's hoping they don't become like them. David has a certain amount of resentment for his creators because he understands his creators put their own engraven image on him by making him look human. But David also knows that he's different because he can live longer and he can process information in a way they cannot. Now, I wish so badly I could talk about Alien Covenant right now because there's an example in there of what David's talking about right there. And that's what makes Alien Covenant important to this film, important to this franchise. So I am going to do another part to this, but it's going to be Alien Covenant, and it'll obviously be talking about spoilers. But I'll definitely be able to finish that thought so you can see how David's example or his hope is actually lost. So later, they go to the engineer's place. They open this room and they find these little urns and they all leak out black stuff and it creates these little creatures and these guys end up getting killed and all kinds of, it's a big mess of stuff. And they find an engineer head. They blow up the head on accident trying to revitalize it or get it going again. And David decides to poison Charlie with part of that black material, which is what eventually brings us an alien. And I'm not going to go into all that because all that stuff is just horror for the sake of horror. It's just, let's try and make this an alien film. It's not really the meat of the film. And so there's a conversation Charlie has with David, and Charlie's getting drunk because Charlie, to be quite honest, is a bit disappointed. He's disappointed because they found no engineers alive, at least what they think they have it. And he's getting drunk, and David goes to talk to him, and David's trying to figure out a way that he can poison him. And Charlie says to David, what we hoped to achieve was to meet our makers, to get answers. Why they even made us in the first place. David asks him, why do you think your people made me? Charlie says, we made you because we could. That's such a messed up answer. And David says, can you imagine how disappointing it would be for you to hear the same thing from your creator? And then Charlie responds, I guess it's good. You can't be disappointed. Charlie banking on the fact that this is an android who shouldn't have emotions. Well, unfortunately, as human beings, we do. And it would be quite the disappointment for us to hear we were made because they could make us. So through David, we're seeing more and more of this resentment toward the Creator, this resentment toward the Father, because the Father is weaker, because the Father is not the same. And you see more of this in David and Elizabeth. They talk quite a bit. And there's a scene where they're talking, and I'm trying to find the quote right now. Unfortunately, I didn't save this one. And it's at this point, Shaw says, "What happens when Waylon is not around to program you anymore?" David says, "I suppose I'll be free." Elizabeth Shaw responds, "You want that?" David says, "Want? Not a concept I'm familiar with. That being said, doesn't everyone want their parents dead?" And Shaw says, "I didn't." Now, it's not Shaw saying I didn't, it's David's response to that. Why would David say that? Why would David say that? See, David's an interesting character because you can tell that David realizes, he recognizes something that human beings never thought to recognize. That it's not about tracing back to where you came from, but it's about looking forward to the future. So David is angry in some way, even though he's not supposed to be able to get angry. And he's angry because he knows he's above his creator, and yet he has to deal with his creator. And now he's watching his creator do what he got to do. Meet his creator. And so he's watching his creator meet their creator. And rather than being convinced that they have already achieved something grand by creating him, they want so badly to know why or how they were created. And so it's a fascinating idea, but it's an idea that doesn't really pan out in this film. And that's one of the issues I have with this movie, is because this idea of creation to creation to creation, and if you've seen Alien Covenant, to creation, is fascinating. It's an interesting idea, but what it means has really yet to be revealed. And the only thing I have been able to conclude from this film is that it really does boil down to the simple fact that David believes every creation should excel or exceed above its creator. David looks at the engineers and he doesn't see something worth investigating. He doesn't see someone worth asking anything to. It's similar with how he feels about God, the concept of God. David even asked Shaw at one point, "It must feel like your God abandoned you," he says, or he states that. He doesn't ask. And Elizabeth says, "What?" And David says, "To lose Dr. Holloway after your father died under such similar circumstances. What was it that killed him? Ebola?" So what he's saying here is, you felt like your God abandoned you because of the way your dad died. God disappointed you in some way. It's this reoccurring message of David saying, move forward. And moving forward best operates by creating something better. But not by leaning on the past. And you have there's actually a scene from the trailer of the film where David's being interviewed. And the interviewer asks David, "What makes you sad?" And David says, "War, poverty, cruelty, unnecessary violence. I understand human emotions, although I do not feel them myself. This allows me to be more efficient and capable, and makes it easier for my human counterparts to interact with me. Interesting. Things make him sad, yet he's not supposed to feel emotions because it makes him easier to be interacted with. And so now you have this other scene where David and Elizabeth is talking. And David tells Elizabeth, a superior species, no doubt. He's talking about the engineers. The hypersleep chambers will impress, I trust. Shaw says, so they were traveling somewhere. David responds, I've managed to work out the broad strips. It's fairly evident they were in the process of leaving before things went to pot. And what he means by that is he's referring to the engineer's little project of these urns went haywire and killed them. And Shaw says, leaving to go where? David says, Earth. And Shaw says, why? And he says, sometimes to create, one must first destroy. If you've seen Alien Covenant, you definitely see the window right there into why some of David's actions are the way they are in that film. But what this is generally trying to, what David's generally trying to say is that creation itself is, in his eyes, the engineers became fixated on creation. And when the human beings were created, they were never really happy with the human beings. We don't know why. We're not told why. We're not told anything of the sort. In fact, if you read the original script, there's a little bit more of a Judeo-Christian feel to the whole thing. And there's a little bit more understanding as to why they wanted to come back and sort of pull off a Revelation, Book of Revelation type thing, where they're just going to mass destroy and then reflourish, which is what the Bible records in the Book of Revelation. So interestingly enough, David's saying these people were trying to pull off a revelation. Why? We don't know. We have no idea. It's explained in the original script, but it's not explained here. So this is just another huge gaping hole in the Prometheus story. And so in the end, Prometheus is an interesting take. It's an interesting film on how our endeavors to try and find out more about ourselves and where we come from can sometimes lead to nothingness. It's like walking into the desert where there's nothing and no man needs nothing. All in all, David is saying the way things should be working is to consistently move forward and not to care about the past. It's not about the engineers. For David, it's not even about humans. It's about him. And it's about what can come after him. It seems like people are so concerned with the past in some ways. And it's not that they're concerned with the past because they think that having that knowledge is a great thing to have in terms of just the knowledge itself, but that we think by having that knowledge, we're somehow going to find what we're looking for. Those answers. But see, the thing is, what Prometheus is playing with is, why are we trying to figure out those answers? And it would seem in the case of Wayland, in the case of most people, in a way, it's trying to find out how to live forever. It's a type of survival. The more you understand about the mechanism, the easier it is to fix it. If you understand the engineer, you understand the engine, the machine. All the better to tune it up. All the better to make it work. I mean, you can look at biological studies and inside. Look at stem cell research. It's absolutely fascinating. Stem cells found within human beings is healing us. The more you understand, the easier it is to fix things. And that's probably the most fascinating thing of all, is our desire for survival leads us down some very dirty paths. It leads us into deserts. That's where it led Waylon. And in Waylon's triumphant moment, his creator, his engineer, knocks him over to kill him. And does kill him, actually cracks his skull on the ground. To which Peter Waylon says, "There's nothing." And David responds, decapitated on the floor himself, "I know. Have a good journey, Mr. Wayland." Wayland that entire time was waiting for some answer. And at that very moment, he wasn't receiving it. Now, it doesn't mean Wayland didn't die and possibly see something. It doesn't mean Wayland, it doesn't really mean anything, because Wayland's still working with what consciousness he had, what brain he has at the moment. But Wayland was hoping for more, obviously, even in his ending moments. Wayland was trying his best not to die. And unfortunately, Wayland never understood that it's not about trying to keep you alive, but it's about those around you. It's about the future. Always look ahead toward the future. That's what David believes, it seems, and that's what I think most of us should believe. I mean, it says something about us on a personal level. How many of us live our lives just always thinking about what made us who we are and all the mistakes? Never taking the time to say, maybe I need to just look forward. Maybe I just need to let it go and keep going. Stop trying to enter the desert. Because there's nothing in the desert, and no man needs nothing. So, thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast, even though, in my opinion, it didn't seem to go anywhere. But Prometheus is just a film I've been meaning to talk about, and I've been wanting to talk about. And, as far as Alien Covenant is concerned, I'd said I'd do a small review. Part of the reason the movie fails is because it touches up on some of these concepts and provides a bit more answers. But the big, giant, looming problem is that it does the exact same thing. It doesn't quite fulfill them. It doesn't quite show you why that matters, or lets you see why it matters. It gives you these smaller concepts that obviously fit and obviously are easy to break down, but it gives you these major concepts and just sort of leaves you hanging. It has a lot of aspects to it that just don't make sense, and that's one of the reasons I didn't care for the film, aside from the, in my opinion, shoddy special effects and just messy film in general, and a terrible ending. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Sorry for taking so long to post this. Share it, subscribe. I'm everywhere. I'm on SoundCloud, Stitcher. I'm on YouTube. So just look everywhere and you'll find me, and just share, like, and subscribe. Thanks.